Color correction is not your job. Kind of. In large-scale production, there are a lot of specialists, each incredibly good at a very, very narrow, specific task, and they are paid to do that task. The smaller the team gets, the more hats you have to wear. Coloring and sound design are very different skills to editing. There is not a lot of crossover. The way that you handle the timeline and the way that you're cutting shots together and your focus on continuity and pacing and tone and good performances, that has nothing to do with making sure that the white balance is correct on a camera. That being said, it is part of the post-production workflow. And if you get a gig with a small enough team where you are one of the only or the only person handling post-production, you're going to have to do it yourself. I'm going to teach you the basics of how it looks and what to understand in order to help you go research further yourself. Basically, I want to give you just enough tools that when you get hired to edit, you can do the editing really well. And if it's a gig where they also want you to color, you're going to know just enough that you can go watch some other tutorials other places in order to do a good job. You're going to have enough in your brain that you can go to YouTube and look up some tutorials and prepare yourself and do a good job. I want to empower you enough so that you're not walking in blind. Ideally, you're working with this kind of footage, pretty well-lit footage. This is disgusting, but we can make it a little bit better. All right, now I'm going to go up here to the color workspace, and I'm going to click on that. Now this has a bunch of default stuff here. Don't worry, we're going to explain all of it. Now, you cannot color individual clips in your project window. If I come here, you can see the project window here, and it includes these 3 clips here. The project window is nowhere to be found in the coloring section. The coloring section is designed specifically to color individual clips in the timeline. So if I color this clip here, this will not apply to the source here unless I tell it to. So when we're coloring these individual clips, I am coloring this instance of this clip in the timeline. Lumetri is Adobe's color system, I guess. This is where we're going to be making most of our adjustments. Now you can see here, there are options at the very top of the Lumetri color menu. This says sequence MVI_0216. This is referring to the instance of this clip in my sequence. I named my timeline sequence so that we could see the difference. Now, if I click this, source MVI0216, this is now going to color the original footage. I change this here. It will have not only changed it in the sequence, but it will have changed it in the source as well. See, if you look over here, when I click, I'm in my program window and I click this clip, I'm viewing something else. So I double click this, I'm in my source. Now that color change that I made has now happened to the clip itself. So this is something to consider when you are editing in a timeline. If, for example, this specific clip were to show up in the timeline multiple times and you want your color correction to apply to all of it all the way through, you may want to consider coloring the source clip. However, most of the time, that's not the case, especially if you're going to be using this clip in different timelines for different purposes. It may have to be color corrected slightly differently. So most of the time, I'm not modifying the source. I'm modifying the sequence instance, the sequence clip of that source. Now you can see when I came back to the color workspace and I clicked on this clip, it looks as if we don't have any settings changed. That's because it defaulted back to the sequence version. So these sequence version changes will happen on top of the source changes. So I'm going to go back to the source. I'm going to reset my source settings, and then I'm going to modify the sequence. I want to modify this sequence clip, not the source. All right, I want to show you a few other things about this view. Effect controls that are normally in the top left, when you go to editing, they're in the top left up here. Effect controls have moved to the bottom right. It is helpful to have them there. You can also drag in effects here. Now we have our source window here in case we need it, but normally what's here is Lumetri scopes. Now the scopes show different information about your clip. I'm going to explain a few of the scopes. So this is the default. I'm going to right click so that I can add some scopes. I'm going to add vector scope YUV, and I'm going to add a parade RGB. These are the 3 scopes that I like to use the most. Now let me explain these one at a time. Now don't be intimidated by these scopes. These are just different ways of interpreting the data that's within the video to help you understand it better. Now the way that the waveform works, it is looking at the image from left to right, and it is evaluating the color and exposure values on each line of pixels all the way across the image. And then it is displaying that. So 100 is the most exposure that can be displayed, and 0 is the least exposure that can be displayed. You can see our clip is pretty bright. So if I come over here to blacks and I turn it down, you can see as I'm sliding the blacks down and making our clip darker, the whole histogram is sliding down because now the values in our clip are being dragged lower. So this is this image. You can see right here, we have a window and it's completely white. Then we have a little bit of dark trim, and then we have another window that's completely white. And if you look over here, you can see that there is all this information up here that is completely white. It's clipped up at the top. It's all the way at 100, which means that we can't get any more information from it. So it's clipped. There's no information there. It's just white pixels. You can see also below, there's all this red right here. That's probably the red from this pillow and the red from this sweater. You can also see there's a good amount of green. That's probably the tone of a little bit of the green in the wall. And then you can see this blue here. This blue is probably this chair. Now you can see that the red, the green, and the blue are pretty much equally distributed on this side, but blue is winning out a little bit. You can see this wall is white, but the true color is actually a bluish hue. So that makes perfect sense. We can see the detail in this wall, but it's a bluish white wall. So you would expect the colors to be close together because when they all equal each other exactly, I believe it equals white, but this is a bluish. So blue is winning, but they're close together. So let's look at another example. This image is very, very warm and very green. So you would expect the red and the green to be much higher. Now you can see where this big brown wall stops. You can see the cutoff in all of the colors, and they start to break up a lot more in the middle. You can see where this cutoff happens on the right side as well. So that is a waveform RGB. Now let's look at a parade. Do you see any similarities? A parade is literally the same scope, but broken out 3 times. When you see white, it's not because it's displaying white. This does not display an exposure color. This displays green, blue, and red. When all 3 of them mix equally, it shows up as white. This scale, 0 to 100, 0 is pure black, 100 is pure white. Where the pixels are on the scope is the actual exposure level of each of the colors. So the parade is the exact same scope, just broken out 3 times. So we see the red, the green, and the blue separated. Now we can see straight off the bat that this image is pretty well balanced because the 3 colors seem to follow each other pretty closely. So this feels like a pretty well lit, naturally colored scene. If we go here, you can see that there's way more red. Green starts way lower, blue starts way lower. This is visually very imbalanced. So that's what's cool about these scopes, because I can look at this and I can tell it's kind of green. To be 100% honest with you though, I may not have made the call that this was very clearly red as well. But this clearly breaks that down for you and gives you the information. All right, now let's talk about the vector scope YUV. Why is it called YUV? I don't know. Now this is a measurement not for exposure, but for saturation. You can see it's essentially based on the color wheel with all of the colors running in a circle. You have this line to connect the dots. I honestly am not positive what this line is. I think it shows the general limit of what can be displayed on most screens. And this line, as weird as it sounds, is the skin tone line. Weirdly enough, no matter your skin color, your skin tone will fall very closely above or below this line. And we can use this to ensure color accuracy and make sure our people don't look weird. Now you can see our image here is leaning hard into the yellow. It's definitely very imbalanced. You can see this one is a lot more centered. It has a good yellow streak, but it also has quite a bit moving towards the blue and cyan, which we would expect based on what we see here. But we can also see that it's all very concentrated in the center. It's not very saturated. These colors are very muted. There aren't any strong blues or strong yellows. This jacket is the strongest color in the whole thing, and you can see it doesn't even come halfway out of the diameter of the circle. So one of the biggest things that I learned in terms of color correction was to ensure that skin tone looked good. So again, no matter the skin color or the race of the individual, this method more or less works. You'll select the clip. You'll get the crop effect. You'll drag it onto your clip. Now this shows up in the bottom here. And what I'm going to do is I'm trying to just crop her face. I want to basically just get her skin tone. So now you can see we've isolated her skin tone and it is pretty far above the line. I would like to bring it down just a little bit. Now the way that we can do that is you see magenta is the opposite of green. Red is the opposite of cyan. So what this means is my skin tones are more magenta than maybe they should be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of green to the image by just pulling the tint a little bit. Now, a colorist might get mad at me for doing it this way with the white balance. You can also do it with curves, but this is the way that I do it. Okay, so I've brought it down to go right onto that line. Now, if I uncheck the effects button, boom. So now I've corrected for skin tone. That's the first thing that we want to do. Now, there are two processes, which are separate processes when it comes to color. One is called color correction, and the other is color grading. I will not be going over any color grading. I've done very little of it myself. I will be going over color correction. Color correction is essentially making up for any camera mistakes and making it look as natural as it did had you been there in real life. You're just trying to get it to a neutral baseline. Color grading is adding intentional color changes on top of that to make it look beyond what it would have looked like in real life, to purposely make it feel extra warm in a Western or extra cool in a sci-fi. You could do a lot with color to change the tone and the emotion of the scene. That is color grading. Color correction is just trying to get it to a good neutral baseline so that it looks as it would have in real life. So what that means is we're going to be dealing with this first tab of Lumetri Color, which is basic correction. Creative is kind of fun. You can add tints, you can add a film filter, you can mess with the saturation. Some colorists are going to actually get mad at me that I'm teaching you to use the basic correction tab at all because they argue that curves are a lot more balanced and a lot more advanced and handle the picture better to begin with. That is true, but I'm not very good with them. They're much more complicated and you don't need to know them for basic correction. I don't use them that often, even though I should. So the things that we're going to want to worry about are white balance, tone, and saturation. There are different colors of light. Obviously, there's a color spectrum, and I have pink and green lights behind me. The sun is 5600 Kelvin. Sunlight is actually very blue. Most of our lights in our homes, lit with tungsten bulbs, are 2400, I think. That light is very warm, very orange. So you can see here that the red and the cyan are opposites of each other. So that is what we call the temperature. Now, there's also tint, which is green versus magenta. And you have to balance both of those. So what you want to do is you want to find true white. The camera needed to be reading the correct version of white as it was recording. So if they were out in the sun, they needed to be recording at 5600 Kelvin in order to match the color temperature of the sun. If they didn't, the image might look very blue, and that's a little bit of what's happening here. The cameras were set to a bit too warm of a color temperature, which made the lighting from the windows look a little extra blue. So we need to account for that. There's also green and magenta in light. You don't deal with it quite as much when you're intentionally lighting a scene, and I don't understand its dynamics as much, but we have to consider that as well. So the first thing, the easiest thing to do is find something that's supposed to be truly white in the frame. Click this little eyedropper and click on the thing that's supposed to be white. Now that has already made some corrections and made our image more warm. Now I used this, but I don't actually think that this whiteboard is true white, and my eye feels like this is a bit too warm. You can see how the red is way higher than the blue now. Before, they were all totally equal, and now with this little correction, the blue is way lower. This feels a bit too much to me. So I'm going to bring the orange down just a little bit. There probably feels good. I also do feel like we could go a tiny bit more pink. So we're at 1 point, or we're at 0.8. I'm going to go to 1.5. I'm going to slide it because I couldn't even tell the difference there. Okay, that's too much. I like sliding it because you can see the change. In fact, I don't even know if you can see the change. You can feel the change. It's so subtle, just adding a couple of points of color. So I'm going to go there. That feels good to me right now. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my skin tone crop to be just focused on her skin. And her skin is too magenta now. We've moved too far up to the top of the vector scope. So I am going to pull back a little bit. I'm going to go to 4. You see how our skin tone clump moved towards our line? And I'm going to go 8. See, that makes no difference. That moves us towards the blue. That's not helpful for our skin tone at all. I actually need to go down farther with the pink. So I'm going to go back to 0. This is really interesting because I thought it needed more pink, but the skin tone method is telling me that we actually need to add a little bit of green. We actually need to go the opposite direction. So I need to go -4 to go towards the green a little bit. That's technically more on. So let's turn off the crop. Okay, yeah, weird. It feels better. Okay, now let's turn off the color. Let's turn back on the color. It feels too green, doesn't it? So this skin tone line is a guideline. It is also up to just your eye. Because, oh, can you see the difference there? When we went from -4 green to 4 pink, there's a big difference there. So this is how color works. You're using the scopes to inform you. You know the general rules and guidelines of how to get good color, but every single shot is different. So you start there and then you use your eye. That looks a lot better to me. So I'm going to go with that for now. Okay, so we have corrected the white balance. That feels pretty good for now. As a general rule, you always come back multiple times, but we're going to sit with this for now. So now we're going to go to tone. You can see we have our windows peaking, and we even have our red right here. There is no blacks beneath 20, I don't know what this measurement is, lumens. So I need to bring down the blacks. Bring those blacks all the way down. Okay, so you see how I'm getting a lot of noise and pixelation in that skirt? I don't want to take the blacks down too far so that I start damaging the image. So I'm just going to bring down the blacks some. And then I'm going to bring down the shadows. See, bringing down the shadows isn't quite as harsh. It's a little bit more friendly. Okay, now that's starting to look weird because the issue is the whole thing is too bright. And you see, it's starting to look crappy. Like it's starting to break down a little bit because what I'm doing, basically the blacks will bring down everything. I don't know exactly the numbers, but the idea is the blacks will bring down everything just in this section here-ish. So it has very little to bring down. I mean, obviously it's bringing down everything, but the whole thing is too bright. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is move the exposure down. Okay, that's too much. We need these colors that are getting cut off. It's called peaking when there's no longer information. We need to keep those peaking at the top. So I'm just going to pull it down a little bit. Okay, you see how it's kind of stretching? So I'm going to make sure that those reds stay peaking at the top. So just did the exposure just a little bit. Now I'm going to raise the contrast, which basically spreads everything apart. It makes the brights brighter and it makes the darks darker. So that's good there. Now I'm going to bring down my shadows. It's still breaking down a little bit. I'm going to bring down my shadow some. I'm going to bring down my blacks some. A little bit more with both. That's a lot better. We still haven't hit true black yet, but it feels a lot happier. Now, this is a bit too much. I want this to feel soft and bright, and there's too much contrast now. It feels too harsh. This isn't an action movie. It's a cute women's retreat. So I am going to soften it up a little bit. I'm trying to bring my black, I'm trying to get more dark. I don't need darks, but I would like them. Okay, that feels pretty good. Turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. That looks pretty good. I'm going to have to call that good for now.